Good evening. They are still ferrying 1 million passengers around the capital every day, but London's bus drivers have tonight demanded much better protection after 8 workers died after contracting COVID-19. The union that represents bus workers wants the front doors of all London buses sealed up, with passengers forced to use the exit doors to get on and off. Well, the Mayor of London told us that suggestion has its problems, but he is looking into a pilot scheme to test it. Well, it comes as the total number of deaths in London for COVID-19 is now over 1,500. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has our top story.
For millions of Londoners, jumping on a bus is second nature, but coronavirus has made travelling on public transport an uncomfortable experience. Anxiety about social distancing and the spread of the disease is shared by passengers and drivers.
I am a bit worried because my mom, she lives with me, she's 74, and the point is, if I catch it, so she can be infected as well.
The risk to bus workers was underlined today. 8 have now died after testing positive for COVID-19. Before coronavirus, London buses carried more than 6 million passengers every day. The lockdown has had a dramatic impact. Even so, around 1 million people are still using the buses. The main union representing drivers says there is an obvious way to protect them. Shut and lock the passenger door at the front.
What we're calling for now is that only central door boarding is used. We should therefore seal off an area behind the driver, so there's no need for any close contact between driver and passengers.
But the mayor said that could put passengers at risk.
It poses some challenges with crowd control. It's not possible often to keep a social distance using just the back doors without crowd control from the bus driver, but these are being explored.
The drivers' union is also calling for personal protective equipment, so-called PPE. I spoke to Mo, a driver in South London. What do you have in the way of PPE?
We've got no PPE. We've got no PPE at the moment.
Gloves?
Some depots, not all depots, are issuing gloves.
What about masks? Are you being issued with masks?
No, we're not at the moment.
What can we do? We have to work to take the key workers, nurses, doctors, to take them, to hospitals. So we keep the London moving.
Tonight, drivers we spoke to said TfL's priority should be to shut the front door.
Well, Simon, understandably, a really nervous workforce there operating our buses.
It's a very worrying time for the drivers. 8 out of 10 bus workers, most of them drivers, have died after testing positive. The drivers feel very exposed. Transport for London insists that the safety of its drivers as well as its passengers is an absolute priority. The buses are being cleaned every day with antiviral disinfectant, and the holes in the perspex screens through which passengers can talk to drivers have been blocked up, but the drivers' union clearly wants more protection.
Let's turn our attention now to the Prime Minister. We know he was admitted to hospital last night after contracting COVID-19 10 days ago. What's an update on his health?
Well, we're not really getting a very clear picture about how well or unwell the Prime Minister is. At the daily news conference from Downing Street, we were told what we've been hearing all day, that he's in good spirits and he's still in charge. But both the Foreign Secretary and the Chief Medical Officer seemed very reluctant to be drawn on his condition, his treatment or his recovery.
He was admitted to hospital for tests as a precaution only, and that was because some of the symptoms that he had when he first tested positive had persisted. He's had a comfortable night in St Thomas's, he's in good spirits, and he's being regularly updated, and he still remains in charge of the government, and we're getting on with all of the various strands of work to make sure at home and abroad we can defeat the virus and pull the country through coronavirus and the challenges that undoubtedly we're facing at the moment.
Yeah, the Foreign Secretary not giving much away at all there, was he? You've reported on Boris Johnson since he was Mayor of London, of course. He's still working with no sign of taking a break.
Boris Johnson has always wanted to be Prime Minister. He will find it very hard to let go, especially in a crisis like this. But there are increasing questions tonight about how wise it is that somebody with COVID-19 is still working. He's clearly not able to shake it off. He's unwell enough to be in a hospital bed. It begs the questions, will there come a time when his doctors say to him he needs to let go and recover? Because most of us are told when we're ill the best way to recover is rest.
Indeed, Simon, thank you. Good evening. The Prime Minister's health is tonight in the hands of some of London's top doctors at one of London's best hospitals. Boris Johnson is to spend a second night in the intensive care unit at St Thomas's in central London, across the river from Parliament. He is said to be stable after receiving oxygen treatment for coronavirus. He hasn't yet needed a ventilator. Well, the good wishes for a speedy recovery have come from across the globe, and even those who have at times opposed London's former mayor have said they are upset that he is in ICU. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has the latest.
All eyes were on Tommy's today as a London hospital became the backdrop to a global news story. International TV crews lined the pavement opposite. Social distancing replaced the usual scramble for the best spot. Inside, doctors were treating Boris Johnson after his condition worsened yesterday. Outside, police stood guard. The Prime Minister's security as well as his health are concerned. It was just after 8 o'clock last night that Downing Street announced the Prime Minister had been transferred to the intensive care unit. The first update on his condition came this morning when we were told he wasn't on a ventilator, but he was being given oxygen. The Prime Minister was clearly struggling to shake off the virus when he joined Thursday's nationwide salute to the NHS. These pictures were enough to ring alarm bells with one former advisor to Mr Johnson when he was London Mayor.
Okay, thanks NHS, thank you.
Only a week ago when he was told he had the virus, he was pretty bullish about just shaking it off and ploughing on. And that's pretty much what he did. But when I saw him, like everyone else, standing outside number 10, leading the applause for NHS workers on Thursday, I thought he looked pretty rough.
Baroness Jenny Jones represented the Green Party on the London Assembly and was no fan of Mr Johnson when he was mayor. She told me she was taken aback by what had happened in the last 24 hours.
I was quite shocked because he is clearly one of those people that you think will just bulldoze through and stay well. So I was quite upset, actually, which surprised me because over the years we've clashed quite badly. But we've also got on extremely well privately. And I do feel huge sympathy for him, his family and of course, his fiancée.
When he was in City Hall, Mr Johnson was often seen on his bike. In government, he had to sacrifice that part of his fitness regime. Cycling and security don't mix. His friends insisted he was still in good shape to fight the disease because he jogs and plays tennis.
I must continue my self-isolation until that symptom itself goes.
But in his most recent appearance on Twitter on Friday, the virus was clearly taking its toll.
Boris certainly won't enjoy being sick. He is somebody who's committed to the job, he's passionate, he leads from the front, that's his character. If I think back to both the preparations for the Olympics and his time after that, he is somebody who wants to grip a situation.
Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, now standing in for the Prime Minister, spoke for the Cabinet.
He's not just the Prime Minister. For all of us in Cabinet, he's not just our boss. He's also a colleague and he's also our friend. So all of our thoughts and prayers are with the Prime Minister at this time, with Carrie and with his whole family. And I'm confident he'll pull through. Because if there's one thing I know about this Prime Minister, he's a fighter.
Tonight, the Prime Minister is still in intensive care. His condition is said to be stable and there'll be further medical bulletins when that changes. Simon Harris, ITV News, St Thomas's Hospital.
Good evening. With 14 London transport workers now dead from COVID-19, pressure is mounting on the Mayor of London to do much more to protect bus and tube drivers. Despite calls from unions to give all drivers gloves and masks, Sadiq Khan told us that is not government policy. He is instead trialling a scheme to ban passengers using the front doors of buses. Well, today, the family of one dead driver said the personal protection was not enough. Here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
Even at 9 months old, buses played a big part in Sarah Nur's life. Her dad, Nadir, was a career bus driver in London. But within weeks of this video being filmed, he was dead. Mr Nur, who was asthmatic, started showing symptoms of coronavirus and died in hospital.
As a key worker, he was basically at the front line of the initial waves of this virus. And even before the quarantine, my dad would express his worries, as there wasn't really adequate guidelines to protect bus drivers and other key workers.
14 Transport for London workers have died after testing positive for COVID-19. 9 of them worked on the buses, most of them drivers. The others included 3 London Underground workers.
These are people who are coming to work to do an essential job, carrying nurses and doctors to hospitals, carrying care workers to their places of work. And they want to carry on doing that, but they've got every right to demand that they do that in 100% safe working conditions.
Many bus drivers are wearing their own masks. Some bus companies are providing gloves. The Mayor defended the decision not to give them all personal protective equipment.
You know the shortage there is of PPE anyway for the NHS and for our social care staff. And as recently as yesterday, we rechased the government to get advice on this. And their advice is quite clear, that transport workers should not be wearing PPE.
Instead, the drivers are being given hand sanitizer and the buses are being cleaned daily. One former TfL board member thinks it should be every time a driver ends a shift.
We know that there are drivers who are infected. We know that there are passengers who are infected, which means we have to act as though everybody is a potential source of the virus.
London's buses are still carrying more than 1 million passengers a day.
I'm a carer, so I use it all day long, up and down the roads, getting to and from my calls all day long, every day.
After pressure from the drivers' union, passengers are going to be banned from using the front door on 2 bus routes in South London. This is one of them. It's an experiment, but it hasn't started yet. The trial might be abandoned if it leads to overcrowding around one door, but it's been suggested London's Boris bus could be a solution.
Rather ironically, the Boris bus comes into its own here because you've got a second and a third door on that bus, so people could get on one door and leave the bus on the other without any conflict.
Pressure is growing on TfL and the bus companies to go even further to safeguard drivers and passengers.
Simon, this has escalated in the last hour, hasn't it?
Yes, the RMT union, which represents rail, tube and bus workers, is telling its members to stop work if they're not given masks, eye protectors and gloves in situations where they think they need them, or where they can't comply with the 2-metre social distancing rule. So, yes, a definite ratcheting up of the pressure tonight.
And also a couple of updates for us. The first one on the Prime Minister's condition.
Yes, in the daily Downing Street news conference, the Chancellor said he was still in intensive care, but his condition is improving. He's sitting up in bed and apparently positively engaging with the medical team.
All right, and also NHS Nightingale?
Built in 9 days, opened by the Prince of Wales last week. It has its first patients now. Remember, it has capacity for 4,000. It's there to make sure other hospitals aren't overwhelmed. We don't know how many patients there are. The NHS says other hospitals in London aren't overwhelmed at the moment.
All right, Simon, thank you.